Hello everyone, and welcome to another video. My name is Daniel. So today I'm going to be sharing some ideas around what is called person-centered practice or client-centered therapy, or a less familiar term, Rogerian Theory, and I hope I've pronounced that correctly. Rogerian Theory. Well, I'm going to call it Rogerian Theory because that sounds super cool. Rogerian Theory is based on the works of Carl Rogers. And Carl Rogers, for me, has been quite an influence in these last couple of years. So my story for his influence is mainly related to my desire to be a counsellor. That's the dream. That's what I'm orientating my life towards. And when I first came across Carl Rogers, I was a bit skeptical because it was just very, I don't know, it was just all so common and familiar, and it was like, well, yeah, I know what person-centered practice is. And when you work in the care world, we know what person-centered approach is. It's putting the client in the center of what you do. How you work with that person, it would be catered towards how they need you to work with them. In principle, we all know this. It's very common knowledge. So I kind of was like, well, okay, cool. I want more profound things, you know. And as time went on, my original agenda with counselling was that I wanted to be a CBT therapist, a cognitive behaviour therapist. I was very, at the time, influenced by a lot of Stoic ideas, and incidentally, one of the foundations of CBT comes from the works of Epictetus. So it was all very, relational to me, and I understood the principles behind CBT. That it's very much analytical, intellectual, replacing a faulty thought for a better one, a more realistic one. So in my view at the time of getting to know what counselling and psychotherapy or psychology is all about, I thought it would be very deep and very sort of intellectual, a lot of theories, those sort of things. And I started falling over on my own shoelaces when I started working more practical in counselling. So we had these sessions where you'd have to now role play as a counsellor, and very quickly I kept tripping over. I felt incongruent, which is what we'll talk about this in a minute, but the whole situation felt plastic, and I had no kind of confidence, no connection with the client, or the client who was role playing. And it really affected me, and I thought to myself, well, maybe I'm not cut out to be a counsellor, because actually this is also real. And that was actually one of the issues, was that I hadn't addressed things within myself. And also, yeah, that's it. So also, whilst doing the practical elements of counselling, role-playing as a counsellor, I didn't know how to kind of behave or respond. And so I typed in, one-to-one tutorial counselling sessions, watch counselling in action, basically. And lo and behold, Mr. Rogers came up, where he was sharing one of his Rogerian theory in practice with a lady. It was a very popular counselling set, Gloria. It was Carl Rogers and his client Gloria, and he was showing his humanistic Rogerian theory in practice, and it blew my mind. And actually, there's two other counsellors from two different types of schools that also sharing their counselling theories with Gloria. And out of the three, Carl Rogers, in my opinion, came out swinging. It felt like he was really in sync with this lady, really connected, was able to really get into the depths and crevice of the issues that she shared. And so I started to reevaluate my own kind of thinking about what person-centered practice was all about. And very quickly I started reading some of Carl Rogers' literature, articles on the web, and eventually came across some really cool books like this one, Carl Rogers on Becoming a Person, which I would highly recommend. And then with that, as a little it's a very much thinner version. It's also the same book or same title, Becoming a Person, but it's 2 lectures. And so if you're ever interested in reading Carl Rogers, I'd read this first because it gives you a good general overview of what the Rogerian Theory is about. And then read the more in depth. And then there's plenty of other books he's written, but this is these 2 books I would say are a good start. Anyway, so coming full ahead, I started applying this theory into practice in my role playing as a counsellor, in my working relationships, with my working relationships with the client as well, staff and client. And I found it to have a very enriching impact in those relationships, and actually very effective for the clients I've worked with who have severe learning disabilities or mental health. And so inspired by his theory, I ended up being a key worker for a person who had a lot of antisocial type behaviours. At the time, the staff weren't ready for this person, and I had this wonderful I saw it as an opportunity to put the Rogerian theory into practice, that the emphasis of it being about the quality of your relationship with this client. And lo and behold, a year later, this client is doing well. Not perfect, who's perfect, but I believe it's got enough sustaining power for this client to feel stable in the place where they're living, and to now start having a more enriched quality of life. Unfortunately, I've moved on now, but so Rogerian theory. So that's a kind of brief introduction, biography, unfortunately, of my experience in coming into this thing. And I'm a big lover of Rogers now. In fact, the way I see my counselling is to actually have Rogerian theory as the foundation to anything that I'm going to build on top of that when working with clients when I become a counsellor in 2 years. Oh, I'll be 35. Oh. Anyway, Rogerian theory. So where do we start with this then? So, Rogerian theory. So Carl Rogers would say that and I'm going to now be speaking in the context of counselling. Carl Rogers would say, and you can use this as a universal thing, would say that it's creating a climate for your client to thrive in. And so what do we mean by creating a climate, and what do we mean by for the client to thrive, to grow? What are these things all about? So Carl Rogers' ideas was that we're all born with an energy, and this may sound that we're tapping into some mysticism. We're all born with an energy that thrives to grow. So Carl Rogers, back in the day when he was a kid, noticed that there was potatoes in a dark room. And even though the dark room was adverse conditions for the potato to grow, he noticed that the roots were still growing, still reaching out to find that light. It was inherent within that potato to still thrive and to be more, or to be what it fully can be. And in the field of mental health, I think that we can interpret that as being something where, so I had a client who was who had a diagnosis of schizoaffective disorder, and had a condition also of being Asperger's, and him being fully aware that this was quite a significant way to view and to feel and to behave in the world. He, it would outwardly manifest as being overtly religious, and almost, I dare say, archaic in the sense of, doing ritualistic self-harming. And for many of us, that can be quite distressing, and we think, well, this person's so disturbed and broken. But looking within the chaos, there is an order of, actually, this is how he deals with his mental health. And when I got to know him, the relationship, I could see that actually these mechanisms he's using, these ideas and things that he's put into his life, which again, very religialistic, was actually a great order of bringing order to this chaos that was going on in his mind. And so one could argue that this energy was manifesting itself through these ritualistic self-harmings, this view very skewed with ideas of karma, but it kept an order. From someone who hasn't got these sort of conditions, it might be a manifestation of actually a person is looking at themselves in the mirror one day and they think, oh man, I need to lose weight. And so they go to the gym. They go on a diet. They're more mindful about what they eat. This energy. And Carl Rogers would call it an actualizing tendency. So we all have this tendency to be more than what we are now, to become have that fullness. And there's a difference between Abraham Maslow's actualized tendency and Carl Rogers' actualizing tendency, and it's within the word actualize. You've got the actualized, which means that there is a point where you can be nothing more than that, and you've got the actualizing, which is you're becoming. And so Rogers' theory was that we never reach that state. We're always changing, we're always growing. It's fluid. It's very much like in the sense of what the Buddhists and Hindus say about enlightenment, or even the Taoists to say that they know the Tao. To say that you're enlightened or to say that you know the Tao is actually, you don't have it then, you've lost it. You'll never know if you're enlightened. You're always on that path. The moment you claim it is the moment you lose it. The moment you say, oh, I know what the Tao is, and yet the Tao is described as ineffable, indescribable, you've conceptualized it and put it in a box. And so this life then, this one life, maybe infinite lives, who knows, but this one life presently is always on a journey. You're always moving and flowing. Things are always disintegrating and reforming. And our lives, and the way Rogers would say, would say it, is that we're, as long as you are working and traveling along the path of growth, then that's the best place to be. You'll never arrive. You'll never get to the end. Actualizing tendency. So that's the second part of creating a climate for the client to thrive in. That's the thriving. It's the actualizing tendency. And so creating the climate is actually, with counsellor and client, as the counsellor, it's my responsibility to create an environment for you to thrive, for you to start reorientating yourself back on the path of actualizing tendency. And so the relationship I would have with my client would be a helping relationship. It wouldn't be a friend. It wouldn't be an authority. It would be a therapeutic relationship. I'm giving you something. I'm companioning myself with you in order for you to grow and to get stronger. So what then is the things in this relationship, this therapeutic relationship, that creates the climate for the client to experience that actualizing tendency? So Rogers would call it 3 core conditions. There are a lot more, but the general overview, certainly what we've been taught in college, what I hear a lot of people talk about with this Rogerian theory stuff is the three core conditions. So what are the three core conditions that produce this climate for actualizing tendencies? Congruence, unconditional positive regard, understanding empathy. If the counsellor can be mindful of those three things and is consistently trying to put that as the is consistent producing those three things, they're going to do really well. It might not be perfect, but it's going to be a lot more better quality than if it was something else. So, congruence. The word congruence means to be real with someone, to be genuine with them. It puts counsellors, it changes the way perhaps some people see counsellors as an authority figure. So in the more psychodynamic Freudian way of thinking, and perhaps also in the CBT traditions, clients come to the counsellor for advice, for support, thinking that the counsellor has the answers. They really don't. And I'll be honest and real with them to say, I don't know your situation. I've already been in this in other jobs that I've done where I've had clients, not as a counsellor, but as a support worker or as an advocate, where they've asked me things for advice, and I have to say to them, look, I don't know, but I can find out for you, and I can present these options to you, and we can, get a feel for it, what you think. See, the premise of Rogerian theory is that the client has the answers. The client has the answers within themselves. And so just before I go more into the core conditions, there's other important side note I need to add here. Rogers came up with something called the Locus of Evaluation, the internal locus of evaluation, which means that in the client and counselling setting, the counsellor is always trying to reflect back to the client, is always trying to help the client look within themselves, to explore those things which are bubbling up. So, for example, if a client says, it feels good that I've not had a drink today. He's an alcoholic. If the counsellor says, yes, I'm really proud for you, I'm really pleased for you, that's an external locus of evaluation. What's happened there is that the counsellor has now given a pleasurable stimuli to the client, which then runs the risk of the client becoming dependent upon the counsellor. Rather, if it's the internal locus of evaluation, the counsellor would say, I see that you're happy today and that you feel proud of yourself. He's bouncing it back. You see, and this is, I guess, again, a very Stoic idea as well as many other religious ideas, but we want people to be content with themselves, to have the strength, to have an adequate amount of inner strength within themselves. So the internal locus of evaluation is extremely important, and this going back then to congruence. If I can be real in how I feel and be genuine with my client, it permits then the client to be genuine and real about themselves. It's perhaps one of the first steps of accepting themselves in order then to produce this inner strength and growth, this actualizing tendency. So congruence, number one, really, really important. We're equal, we're real, it's genuine. I mean, wouldn't you want to be, if you were seeing a counsellor, wouldn't you want to feel that what you're sharing to the counsellor is being real with you, he's not just being a fake, a fraud? And real relationships that are long lasting, are based on honesty and genuineness and truthfulness. Number two, unconditional positive regard. And unconditional positive regard is perhaps the most toughest thing to do, because from my understanding of it, it's one that is very spontaneous. It's having a regard for someone regardless of how they come across or what they've done. So for me, for example, I feel I would probably struggle to have an unconditional regard for a paedophile if they were seeking counselling. And so that might be then, in the name of congruence, something where actually they would need to be referred to someone else, because I might not be able to regard that person. I might have a lot of tinted lenses looking at that person, and so the quality of the work then is greatly diminished and affected. So unconditional positive regard. And if you can do this, if you can have unconditional positive regard for a client or for a staff member or for your husband or wife or whoever it is, the person, it allows then that person to start exploring the issues that they may feel absolutely embarrassed about. You know, let's go with the paedophile. You know, I do believe in rehabilitation. I do believe that there is work to be done. I don't think it's sufficient enough to lock the jail cell and that's it. I believe there is work to be done in that sort of realm of work. And so in order to, you know, get any, you know, effective exploration and therapeutic results with someone like this is only theory, I could be completely wrong. We need to then be unconditionally regarding them regardless of what they say or do. That then permits the client to feel like they're in a safe environment to explore those issues. And then finally, understanding empathy. This kind of really does change the way, changes the sort of status of the counsellor. You know, so for example, a counsellor in old school counsellors, and what I guess is, as I said, is people's perceptions, is that they are an authority figure. But in order to have understanding empathy, the counsellor has to first of all take an interest, has to really make an effort to listen and listen well, so that they can enter into the world of the client. And when they enter into the world of the client, the counsellor, in terms of status, becomes on equal footing, equal level with the client, and they become a companion travelling in the world of the client. And what that means practically is that when the client is saying things, the counsellor is able to get a sense of feeling of what the client is feeling, is able to accurately communicate back what the client is saying and feeling. So for example, the client might say like, oh, you know, it really ticked me off about my dad and blah, 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 blah. You know, he never listens, he never, you know, blah, blah, blah. I always want his approval. And the client and the counsellor can reflect that back saying, so if I'm hearing you correctly, but it feels as if that, you know, you were craving for your dad's affections and approval, and you know, you feel like a ghost. He doesn't hear he doesn't hear you. He doesn't, you know, etc. And the empathy is important because what's happening there again is promoting that internal locus of evaluation. You are being essentially, in another respects, a mirror, and the client is hearing back what they're saying, and it causes them to ponder and to think and to go even more deeply, because the objective in the end then, now I suppose this is going more into the more psychodynamic aspects, is for the client to get insight, to realise some of these things that are in the subconsciouses which are bubbling up, and to not put them to bed, but maybe to put them to bed, I don't know, it's sort of bad terminology, but it's to have that insight, to have that acceptance, to see the truth of that situation, And this is another aspect of Rogerian theory, is that there is a strong element of mindfulness, of present state awareness. And again, this might also filter and go into a bit more of these sort of Gestalt ideas, but it's very client-led, and it's addressing and dealing and being in the moment of what the client is presenting. So again, the counsellor is not going, oh, what about this? What about that? Oh, why do you think this? Why do you think that? He's not asking too many questions. He's just embracing the client on and where they are. Has no other agenda but to flow and to follow with the client. It's very much like the analogy of Christ, where he says, take my yoke. It's easy and it's light. And that means that Christ and the other person are holding the weight together and are traveling wherever they got to travel. So it's very, very human, and this is probably one of the issues, and this is one of my issues that's affected me for a long time. And it's only now that I'm starting to really think about, well, what is a relationship? What is the meaning of relationships? And it's a skill. It's really knowing what you have and what you need to do to create a relationship. So so that's some of the Rogerian theory. By no means has this been exhaustive. So just to summarize in these last few moments, so the Rogerian theory is that everybody has an energy which is where they're on this path of actualizing tendency. They have this actualizing tendency to be more than what they are. That sounds better. I'm terrible when it comes to talking in past, present, and future tenses. So they have this actualizing tendency to grow continuously, to be more than what they are now. And that's an ever-flowing, ever-changing process. No one ever gets there. The path is it, I suppose. And the climate to induce that sort of way of feeling and thinking and behaving for the client is to create a therapeutic or helping relationship which has three key features in that relationship between counsellor and client. Congruence, to be real with that person. Unconditional positive regard, to regard them regardless of what they have done or what they say or what they might do. And have that understanding empathy, which is to get into their world and companion with that client. And with those three things in mind, it's going to be a very, very powerful experience for the client. And so I was speaking to one of my fellow students the other day, and she was saying about, Carl Rogers, we all know it, blah, and actually, and that's the tendency as well for people who know about Carl Rogers. I think, oh yeah, we know about the core conditions, but actually, if you start to dig a bit more deeper and don't just scratch the surface, actually, it's very profound. And just on a complete different note, in terms of spirituality and philosophy and religion and all those sort of aspects, everybody talks about Mr. Jung as the kind of psychologist that also had this great spiritual side, but Rogers is way up there as well. There's if you want me to, I can give you guys a link, but an article he wrote about spirituality, and I would say he's equal to Jung in terms of like being able to not just be secular with the psychology aspects, but he is fully integrated and embraces everything that is spiritual and mystical. And I would dare say he's a mystic. He's a great guy. So check him out, and by all means, like I say, get those two books, because they're a great start to understanding more about Rogerian theory. Until next time, peace out.